We grow giant kelp at vast scale. Technically, it looks like a forest the way we do it, so we call it forestry. Also, because we're only trimming the seaweed every 3 months. We're not cutting the whole thing, so it's not just being cute to call it forestry. So we afforest the sea with these vast kelp forests, and they support an enormous amount of life. They also have a carbon pathway, so there are carbon credits associated. And it's really that drives the team.
We have beautiful stories in our country, very interesting stories. And I've probably never been as curious as I am today regarding a story of that brought an oil exec to the shores of Namibia, down in the beautiful Lüderitz, to do something completely new, hopefully and probably going to change the world in the process. And to share his story here, we are lucky to welcome Daniel Hooft from Kelp Blue down in Lüderitz. Daniel, welcome to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Like I said, I'm so curious about this amazing story, and I've been following you for quite a while. But I think let's start at the beginning. How your younger years and then your career before you ended up in Namibia.
Yeah, so I'm Dutch, which is why I can sort of follow Afrikaans and try to speak it after a few drinks. But I grew up really everywhere else in the world. We moved to Dubai when I was born, and then to Canada when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And then I did the rest of my schooling in Switzerland and in England. Went to Russia for a year after finishing school. Did do my university in the Netherlands and maybe 2 or 3 years living there. But then moved abroad again for Shell. Was in drilling, first in Nigeria, then in Russia again, then in, gosh, where did I go next? Jordan, Sweden, Gabon, Australia, running a joint venture with the Chinese state. So lots of different places. And while we were living in Australia, my wife went to a lecture by a famous Australian scientist there, sort of David Attenborough, a chap called Tim Flannery, who talked about seaweeds, and she came home and was talking about this, and I got interested and started reading about it, and suddenly the penny dropped that there was maybe something more useful and more exciting to do than just be another one of the oil army. And so, yeah, the rest is history.
But how did it happen from Australia to Lüderitz, and why Lüderitz?
Yeah, okay. So Lüderitz. So when you decide to do seaweed in at large scale, because that's the thesis, that you have to do this at vast scale to make it have significant impact, but also to make it economic. You then start looking at which kind of seaweed, and we concluded that giant kelp, the biggest of the seaweed species, is the right one. And then you look at where it's happiest. And I'd always remembered my father's story about how Napa Valley in California was developed for wine, which was a number of, I think, French and German wine entrepreneurs who mapped where the best wines in France were grown, what the climatological conditions are, and then simply looked for a place that had the same sort of temperature ranges and bandwidths, that had the same sort of soil, the same sort of solar irradiance, and that's how they identified the Napa Valley. So I thought, let's do the same. It worked for them. I worked with a geographic information system specialist who we'd worked with at Shell, who was a NATO mapper. And we made a map of nutrients, temperature, wave heights, underwater conditions for the whole world. So we have a map that shows where seaweed of our kind will grow best. And to my great astonishment and happiness, the little bit around the coast, around Lüderitz, popped up as number one worldwide. Number one that's reachable. There are places like Kerguelen where it's even better, but Kerguelen is a little island in the southern Indian Ocean that has no planes, and it takes, I think, 2 weeks to reach by boat. And why happy? Because we had done our honeymoon here in 2010, and we're always very fond of Namibia. And at moments that I was bored with my oil existence, I always remember sort of scrolling through whether there were farms for sale in Namibia and trying to think, how could I go and live there? And then so when this comment came up, I was quite pleased.
Okay, so at least you've been to Namibia before, because I think
Yeah.
there's a difference between Lüderitz on a map and Lüderitz on the ground.
Yeah, I'd been to Namibia for this honeymoon, and I'd also been a few times for work, believe it or not. I was in charge of a venture drilling shale oil wells in Jordan, very shallow wells with no blowout prevention, so without getting technical. That's a completely different type of drilling than you're used to doing in the oil industry. And the oil industry technically can be very arrogant. And so our teams were telling me, we'll just do the same as we always do, but with smaller drilling rigs. And I thought, surely people who drill in the desert for water, for diamonds all the time, are smarter than this and have developed something that's leaner. And so I did a number of visits to Botswana, to Namibia, to find out what people do here who are drilling for water, who are doing directional coring, for example, for diamonds. And sure enough, of course, they were many, many orders of magnitude leaner and more cost-effective than what we were doing in the oil industry. So we took all those learnings to Jordan and were able to have the most cost-effective drilling campaign on the planet, I think, at the time. So I had been for work also to the uranium mines, to a few places around Gubabis. So I knew a little bit about it, but I hadn't been to Lüderitz. So I came and visited beginning of 2020, a few weeks before COVID. Drove down to Lüderitz on my own. People had told me it's very windy. I did arrive in sort of 60-knot winds, which was quite exciting. The next morning was beautifully calm. The secret of Lüderitz, of course, which we all know, is that actually it's beautiful weather most of the time. And those of us who live there are quite fond of the wind, until it blows for 3 weeks at a time, and we're less fond of it. But it had an instant attraction, both in its charms with all its old buildings, but particularly in the people. There's something about all communities that are so remote that makes them special. And I think remote communities tend to fall into categories, either categories where everybody has a vendetta with everybody else, and you can see that as soon as you arrive, or these communities where there's a strong sense of mutual support. And that's very much the category that Lüderitz falls into. When you arrive, nobody ever talks badly about each other. Everybody is ready to jump in and help each other when it's required. Of course, underneath the skin, there are dislikes and old gripes, etc. But on the face of it, it's one community that's very supportive. And that makes it a lovely place to live.
But I think that's beautiful, and it's a great compliment for Lüderitz. But I think that's also an opportunity for us as a country, because as a country, we're just a larger Lüderitz. That interdependence and that network effect, 1 degree of separation almost across the board. And that's an opportunity if we utilize it correct. But I think that's a great compliment for Lüderitz. And okay, so you arrived there. Did you share your plans with the people?
Yeah, so I talked to a number of people there, some of the aquaculture entrepreneurs, some of the town council, some of the people sitting in the yacht club drinking Jägermeister. And there was, frankly, mostly skepsis. I think a number of people were barely polite enough not to burst out laughing. There was also a number of people who said, no, this has been done before, because seaweed farming has been done before in Lüderitz in the 80s, I think, early 90s, and done very successfully. So yeah, there was a mixture of responses, and largely Buchters are open to anything and skeptical about everything. So it took some time to win them over.
I'm very glad to hear that, right in the beginning, this was actually your wife's probably idea of her impetus. Lucy, I've met her, wonderful. So I was wondering, the first time that you brought her and the kids to Lüderitz, what was the reaction? Was it similar?
Well, I mean, having worked for Shell, so when we met, I was sort of moonlighting doing real estate, vineyards in Georgia. She was working for the British government there. She then moved to China, and I moved to Jordan, and then she moved to Sierra Leone. So for many years, we were having a romance while not being on the same continent, which is pretty inconvenient. And then at some point, we decided that rather than me joining her in Sierra Leone and becoming a sort of a diamond gangster, I guess is the thing that you become, and that she would join me in Jordan, where she worked for Queen Rania in education, as it happens. And from then on, she followed me around, and you go to places like Gabon, and there really is nothing to do for spouses because it's a shell camp in the middle of the jungle. And so I suddenly thought, gosh, am I going to drag my poor wife off again to the ends of the world? What about how she feels about this? And I've pictured in my mind going to Lüderitz together and how embarrassing that could be. You know, well, last time the sunset was a lot prettier than this, and do you like it? Conversation. So I thought, how do I give her the chance of seeing this bizarre place without me hovering over her shoulder? And so I suggested that she go down with our son, who was probably only 10 at the time. So they got a camping sort of four-wheel drive bucky with a tent on the roof, and it was still COVID, I suppose, 2021. And they drove down through the Namibian, came to Lüderitz. I think fell in love with it immediately. Then my wife is English, so when she saw that there was Marmite for sale in the OK Foods, she was immediately, she said, this is a place I can live. So it worked out well.
I think it's interesting, you know, your story of being all over the continents and in different continents, like you say, and then, you know, very closely together in a very intimate community, and the impact that you've had on that community since then.
Yeah. I mean, it's not entirely new for us. Like I said, in Gabon, we were in a camp with 170 households, so even more remote, with no road access to the rest of the world, and we've lived in big cities, so we've seen the most urban environments in the world and some of the most remote, and Lüderitz sort of falls certainly in the remote category, but it's bigger than some of the places we've lived in, believe it or not. And yeah, it's even having been there for only 4 years now. The first year we were there was no green hydrogen, there was no oil and gas. It was really very much still tail end of COVID time. And when I remember bringing a workboat from Walvis Bay, we sailed it down, a 12-meter boat, little catamaran that we'd fixed up. And there was enormous excitement in Lüderitz. There's a new vessel in town. Now you look at the cruise vessels and the oil and gas boats, and I don't think anybody would notice if we'd brought another 12-meter boat this year. So it's changed. But having said that, at the same time, often you come up here to Windhoek and people think that there's this enormous boom going on in Lüderitz, in real estate and things, and that's not quite the case. So there's probably more activity than there was when we arrived, but it's still fairly low-key.
Let's talk about Kelp Blue. You know, when you started the business, what worked, what didn't work, what surprised you, what's you know, the lessons learned so far?
Yeah, so the thesis for Kelp Blue is that we grow giant kelp at vast scale. Technically, it looks like a forest the way we do it, so we call it forestry. Also, because we're only trimming the seaweed every 3 months. We're not cutting the whole thing, so it's not just being cute to call it forestry. So we afforest the sea with these vast kelp forests, and they support an enormous amount of life. They also have a carbon pathway, so there are carbon credits associated. And it's really that drives the team, the realization that within months of putting these kelp forests there, you have an enormous amount of wildlife that accretes, that starts growing, that starts using this environment as a hatchery, as a nursery, as a hunting ground, as a hiding ground from predators. And so you can physically see the biodiversity hotspot that you're creating, and we're starting to be able to measure how that overflows into the surrounding area with the research that our students are doing. So very specifically, for example, in crayfish, monitoring how the crayfish stocks in our new kelp forest behave and how that affects the crayfish stocks around it, which of course is very close to all the hearts of most people in Lüderitz. So that was what we set out to come and prove, that we could do it technically in open water, which has never been done before, that we could do it at scale, that the biology would work, that we could do some selective breeding, that we could harvest it, that we could do all this economically at the costs that we thought we should be able to reach, that we could process it into something useful. We use the kelp to make an agricultural input, a so-called biostimulant, essentially, to keep it simple, a fertilizer replacement that boosts plant health, makes your crops yield more while improving soil health at the same time. So really a double effect, which is quite different from chemical fertilization, where you certainly boost yield, but your soil health degrades. So a chemical farmer is in a bit of a negative spiral. Every year you need to put more nitrates.
100%.
While if you use a blend of chemistry and biostimulants or purely seaweed extracts with other inputs, then you can rebuild soil health and so reduce your inputs year on year rather than having to increase them.
So it's 100% organic.
100% organic. I mean, it's smashed up seaweed that's then put through a few machines, and we add a little bit of citric acid to preserve it because it bacteria and fungi also like it, so to preserve it during transport. But it's basically just squashed seaweed, and so in business, as you know, what you'd like to be able to do is to get your sales first, and then once you've got those, is then build the thing. Because what we're doing is so unique, that was not really a proposition. So we had to go through the steps of building the entire thing, a bit, I suppose, like building a hotel, and only then can you start selling rooms. So that was exciting, to put it mildly. There's lots of up and downs, moments where we thought, is this going to work at all? But one forgets the troughs and the bad times, and one remembers the good times. But there were certainly some touch and go moments where we thought we wouldn't survive.
But I'm also sure you learn a lot from that.
Yeah, you learn most from the bad times,
and you're better for it.
Yeah. It's how you come through the bad times that defines you as, I think, a company.
So your commercial model is, the physical product that you make from the seaweed, but there's also the carbon element to it.
Yeah. So when we seek investors, we don't talk about the carbon very much, and there's a number of reasons for that. I guess the simplest one is that the money we spent to get the carbon methodology going, essentially to get the accreditation process with the accreditation bureau called Gold Standard, was given to us by De Beers as an investment, so not really given to us. And in return, they receive the first 30,000 tons a year of carbon credits once we produce those. So essentially, initially, I have nothing to sell. But there's also the reason that the carbon markets are very erratic. They're very up and down. The scientists and journalists who write about the carbon markets are incredibly vocal and incredibly opinionated and polarized. And so as soon as you start making claims in the carbon world, there are people who want to shoot you down or say that it's understated. And so it's a very emotive area where bringing this as an investment story makes that just noise. So we don't even talk about that. And the third reason, I suppose, is that if you look at the fundamentals, it might add 10% to the revenue, which is interesting, but it's not make or break. And so we don't really focus on that too much while we progress the science. What we focus on, in addition to the biostimulants, is other products. So we've developed a pretty good kelp leather, so something that you could make wallets or phone cases or handbags from. In fact, the president has a kelp leather handbag. I hope it's still in one piece, but and I have a kelp leather wallet. And then we also make foam, so basically the filling for seats and car seats, etc., which is all polyurethane in today's world. Polyurethane is an impossible to recycle product, quite toxic in production. And so replacing it has an environmental benefit, but it's also surprisingly expensive. So we have a shot at providing a environmentally better product at a competitive price. Technically, that's the problem with every plastic or hydrocarbon derived product, is that they're amazing products. The reason we don't like them is that they last for 1,000 years, but that's also why they are great products. The things that last for 1,000 years are very durable. So we have a number of other products in the pipeline that will double, triple the revenue in due course.
And I think that's the problem with humanity. We don't, we don't look at the environmental cost. It doesn't come into the commercials. But we are paying for it, or at least our children will.
Yeah.
But what I love about, and I understand what you're saying about the carbon angle to your business, but what I like about your approach is it's purely scientific, because there's been a lot of hype around carbon, and I think a lot of fluff around it. But the pure and robust scientific process that you go through to show the facts of carbon sequestration and not the feelings about it. Hopefully, eventually we'll have a major impact, because it will have an impact on our environment.
Yeah.
So hopefully some of that will flow over to the commercials as well.
And it's also, as far as I'm concerned, it's also a sound business decision if you have a bit of patience. So working rough and fast with carbon claims generates you credits faster. They're open to criticism, which, fine, people will criticize whether they're solid or not. But the premium you get for that credit is probably quite low. So to make that more specific, if you do a Vera or a pure earth process, and I'm not criticizing any of them, they're different prospects, then you get to a credit that markets for maybe $7, $15 a ton. If you go a gold standard route, which is a lot more onerous, insists on showing co-benefits, they're very picky about which projects they want to support, then you're more in the order of magnitude of $30, $40, $50 a ton. If you go to the sort of the highest quality credits with the least negative side effects, biochar, for example, you're more at 100. The only seaweed carbon credit at the moment is under Japanese accreditation, and retails for $550 a ton, also because it's very scientific, very rigorous. And so if I can spend a little more time getting to a place where I have a credit that retails for $500 a ton, I think that's worth it, rather than hurrying and getting to one that retails for $15. So that's also part of the thinking.
And what I like about that, if I take it back to the Gondwana story, and we always say, and then you would know it better than us, sustainability starts with profitability, first and foremost. But what I like about what's happening in the world, from consumer perspective, is they like to support those products, but which does have the added benefit to the environment.
Yeah.
And it's not only the carbons, like you said, it's also the whole ecosystem impact that you have. And, how you measure it, that's maybe something different, but it's clear as daylight that you have also a massive impact on the whole ecosystem where you operate.
Yeah, enormous. Yeah, my opinion is that the world has made a couple of errors in the last few decades on our waste problem.
Yeah.
Carbon, greenhouse gases is a waste problem. It's nothing else than piling up the domestic waste outside your house, and because it's invisible, we're doing nothing, even though the waste is piled up to the roof almost, and we have to crawl out of the door and go up over this pile of waste. That's I think the reality of it. And if you produce domestic waste, at some point your neighbors want you to remove it.
Absolutely.
So at what cost this waste is really the question we have in front of us. And I think there's been two mistakes made. One is this voluntary market, I think, is a huge mistake, because it effectively means there isn't a real market.
Absolutely.
As soon as times get tough, well, the volunteers pull back and they don't buy, and the market collapses.
Which means there's not a real cost.
Yeah, there's not real supply and demand. It's a luxury thing. And the other is this perspective that it should be the consumer driving this. The consumer should have the choice to make an environmental choice or not. As if, it's your choice whether you throw your rubbish on the floor after having eaten it or put it in the bin. But it isn't. If you throw your rubbish on the floor, you will get fined. You should get fined.
Absolutely.
And so I think there's been an enormous abdication of responsibility of the law, of governments in this, in saying, let's leave it to the voluntary behavior of companies, to the voluntary behavior of consumers, rather than saying, this is damaging to the environment, which, as you pointed out, is not our choice to make. This is the world we pass on to next generations. We don't own this world. And so we need to legislate more strictly to make sure we don't make such a mess of things.
Absolutely. Tell me where is Kelp Blue today, and what are the plans for the future?
Yeah, so today we've got about 6,000 hectares of license in the water offshore Lüderitz, which for aquaculture is a lot. On land, of course, it's the size of a relatively small southern farm, and that allows us to grow for probably more than a decade. We've got 30 hectares in the water, which provides us plenty to fill our factory. We have a little factory that works quite well, and we're building up sales. So sales at the moment is mostly in Europe, waiting for registration in a number of countries, including Namibia. And as those sales grow, we will look at expanding growth, planting more forests, expanding the size of the factory. So we've proven the model. We now need to fill the order book and then start expanding.
And also again the science behind the product. It's clear that this product is really, really working.
Yeah.
It does have a really positive impact on the soil health.
Yeah, I mean we sell to distributors, but our customers are of course farmers. Ultimately, farmers are very fact driven. I mean, you hear a lot of people saying that they're conservative, that they're not creative. That's not the case. Farmers are very willing to try new things, but they're also very cautious in terms of having been sold a lot of nonsense.
Yeah.
A typical farmer, whether they have a formal education in agronomy or not, has probably struggled to keep that up because a farming life is a very busy life. You don't really have time or much of a social network to spar with other experts. So they're often very dependent on what their agronomists tell them. The agronomists work for the distributors. So everybody knows that they're in a bit of a conflict of interest, and so they're skeptical by nature. What they also are ingrained, and whether this is true or not is sort of irrelevant, is that their farm is different from everybody else's farm. So you'll come and say, here's this product, it works great, and their instant reaction is, yeah, well, that won't work on my farm. And so to convince farmers, you have to be very facts-based, and ultimately you're going to have to do a trial on their land, which makes the whole sales cycle quite slow, but in a way rewarding. It's hard work, but once you get there, not because you made a jazzy advert or did on Instagram or had a pretty model, but because your product really works. And so we set out to do this through field trials. You start with academic institutions, research institutions, research farms that are set up for this purpose. And we do broad spectrum field trials on all sorts of crops in all sorts of countries. I think we've done more than 400 field trials to date, and some of them look at net yield, some of them look at response to drought, some of them look at comparing towards other forms of fertilizers, dosage, so how much product do you use, what time of year do you use it. So there's an enormous amount of variability in how you apply these field trials and what the purpose of them is. And then if the weather is erratic, the meaning of the field trial might go over the wayside. So it's you build up an enormous database of science, empirical science on how it works, with some pretty amazing results. Like grape yields that go up by 30%, while the sweetness and the flavor of the grape improves and the shelf life. Strawberries, almonds that produce better yields with 30% less water. So there's some pretty incredible results in the dossier.
And I think it's so vital that we really share and spread those stories.
Yeah.
It's so important because it's even if you forget about the environmental benefits, it's just in terms of yielding, the commercials just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And there's obviously a whole lot of added benefits in terms of soil health and sustainability in the process.
Yeah. And so for Namibia specifically, it's a tiny market for us if you compare it to other countries, but it's the home market, so a very emotional one that we'd be proud to serve. But it also so happens that our type of seaweed, so each seaweed extract has slightly different modalities and things that it works on. Giant kelp's sort of superpower is its ability to help plants withstand drought. And so that, of course, is very topical for Namibia, where certainly anybody who's doing rain-fed crops has a nerve-wracking time during the early part of the year. So we look forward to expanding sort of the field trials here and our experience with how to apply it properly to improve yields, to improve soil health, to improve margins and quality of food for Namibian farmers.
It's a no-brainer. So let's get it done.
Yeah.
I think it's so important, and it's like you say, it's emotional. It's our product. It's our story, and you've used words like this has never been done, and I love how as a Namibian, and I've spent my whole life here, that we're not known for that cutting edge. As a nation, we're a tiny nation, and this is coming up more and more in conversations. If you talk about high iron and everything it's doing, and the work that you guys are doing is literally cutting edge globally.
Yeah, just wait. Next year, hopefully you come and you'll see the seaweed being harvested by a solar-powered unmanned harvester. So it's a 12 by 12 meter boat. To me, from oil and gas, that's small, but most people think it's a big boat, and it is entirely renewable powered. There's nobody on board. At the moment, it's still remote controlled. But in due course, like some of the lawnmowers that you see at fancy hotels that run themselves, it will be autonomous. So when the weather is right, it'll go out. It'll know which patch of forest to harvest. It'll come back in, it'll dock, it'll spew the seaweed into the factory, and then it'll go back out on its own. That's definitely a first. There are many people who would like to be building this sort of boats, but regulators in other countries are very nervous about this. There's also lobbies, of course, of people who think that jobs will be lost. Jobs are not lost. You replace a few relatively low-paid jobs on a vessel with higher-paid jobs onshore that are controlling this vessel or maintaining it and so forth. And so I'm super proud of the fact that in Namibia, when we went to the Department of Maritime Affairs and the whole committee that looks at safety at sea, etc., that the response was enthusiasm. Will this be a first in the world, and can we do it in Namibia? Then let's go. How can we help you? And that's the sort of mindset that I think will bring this country forward.
We have to. Unfortunately, I wish we could, but we can't afford to be conservative in this country. Not with our socioeconomic realities. We have to take risks and do what you and your families do.
Yesterday evening, I was having dinner with a few friends, and we were doing the maths on the job creation ambition that NDP6 has, and it's quite daunting. You divide that 500,000 jobs by the 4 or 5 years remaining, and it's sort of in the 200-300 jobs a day that need to be created. Our ambition is to create maybe 400 or 500 jobs in the next 5 years. So that's a drop in the ocean of what needs to happen. So you need a lot of Kelp Blues. You need a lot of not only a lot of Kelp Blues, you also need Kelp Blues who behave in different ways than has been done in the past in terms of, at the moment, for example, I need some storage tanks. Think of wine factories, those sort of big stainless steel tanks. And the temptation is to go to China because it's cheaper. That's starting to change. China is no longer so cheap, and the transport is so expensive that the economics don't quite stack up. The temptation then is to go to South Africa and just get off the shelf because they do this all the time. But there are people who build things in stainless steel in Namibia. They haven't built these type of tanks yet because there's no wine industry here. But why not go through a bit of effort and have ultimately probably a cheaper tank made? Most people, I think, historically don't make those choices because they think, as if I don't want to be the guinea pig.
Absolutely.
We're happy to be guinea pigs. We're certainly happy to be guinea pigs if it involves a local producer. And yes, ideally, I'd like that to be at a better price, and I'll take the risk that it won't be a perfect product. So we also need that sort of behavioral change, that the default isn't let's call the South African producer or let's call the Chinese producer, but a bit more creativity around how can we get this done here. This harvester I was talking about, for example, we're having the whole hull, which has been built already, was built by Pro Edge Steel in Cape Hope. Cape Hope is not a shipyard place. I think it may be the farthest shipyard from any body of open water in the world.
Another world first.
Yeah, another world first. So Pro Edge typically build farmer sheds, silos, mining storage tanks. So they're very competent at steelworks. They just haven't built anything at sea yet. Well, they have now, and it was a pleasure to do. Because they hadn't done it before, they really researched what they needed to do in terms of steel grade and painting. So I'm in fact confident that I got better quality, and it was cheaper. So, to me, that's a triple win.
That's a beautiful and a brilliant story, and I think a great example of what can be done. And like you said, you're pioneers, and when you started this, there were clearly no guarantees, but the model has been proven. This can work.
Yeah.
In terms of the kelp.
Yeah, no, the model's been proven. I mean, we are, our installation method, our installation costs are a little lower than we thought they'd be. Our yields are higher. There is some seasonality, which we hadn't expected. So in the winter seasons right now, there are kelp lice which eat the canopy. They like our seaweed a lot. And so we're starting to see that we're also stimulating the species that eat them. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the coming years we start to see a natural balance with predators taking them out.
Okay.
So there have been some surprises, but largely we are overperforming against what we'd expected. And now there's the long, difficult bit of getting sales to the level where we earn more than what we spend.
Oh.
And I think that'll take us another 12 to 18 months. It's pretty soon.
Around the corner.
Yeah, around the corner.
Now let's pivot a little bit to another thing that I really respect about your story is that, because Lüderitz is so remote, you could have had your family in Windhoek or even further offshore, but you moved into the community and you had an impact beyond just Kelp Blue, specifically around the Blue School.
Yeah.
Tell us a story about the Blue School.
Yeah, okay. So we looked at I come from a big corporate environment, and you can't, after 20 years in a company like Shell, you can't just shake that off like a water off a duck's back. You have become a bit of a shell machine. And so in that corporate view, you have something called community engagement and stakeholder development. And if you remove all the jargon, what it's about is being a good neighbor, and what it's also about is that whether you like it or not, there's a societal expectation that companies do something for their environment, and whether that's right or not, you're going to face it. And if you do nothing, then you will find, I think, in a smaller community like Lüderitz specifically, that people then also won't help you out when you're in a crisis. So there's self-interest in doing things for the community, as well as the fact that we're humans and we also want to give back. Although given that we're not profitable, you could argue what do we have to give back yet? But that aside, you want to do something for the community. My learning from 20 years of good and bad examples in the oil field is that it pays to be very deliberate about what you do. So pick your projects, pick your themes, be consistent, and realize that nothing is easy in terms of altruistic or philanthropic activities. They don't just succeed because you're so generous that you give something. You have to work at them, often even harder than at business, because the outcomes are so much less easy to measure than just cash on a bank. So we looked at what we could do, given our small scale, given what the challenges are in Lüderitz, which are many. There are broken bits of the whole societal picture to a certain extent. I mean, don't want to be too negative. It's a great town, but there are things that can be improved wherever you look. We obviously can't do everything. We also shouldn't be doing the job of government. So we landed on schooling. Early schooling is the thing that had most impact. And then, of course, there's also self-interest, because I have children of school age, and so the choice was either boarding school, which fine, but I like my children, so I'd like to see them every day, or setting up a school. And so that's what we set out to do. Initially, a primary school, because we thought we'd be there for a few years. And then as we realized that we might want to stay longer, we thought, why don't we go for a secondary school? And that's where we're setting up now. So the ambition is to set up a school that is world-class. I'd like the graduates in the school to be able to pick whether they want to go to the world's best ballet academy, or Stanford, or Oxford, or Cambridge, or MIT, or Tsinghua University. I'd like them to have the pick of wherever they want to go, in whichever expertise they want to go, academic, artistic, and so really building a broad child and being able to take any child and making them excel at what they are good at or are passionate about. And that's, I think, a cut above, in terms of ambition, anything that the region has to offer, with all due respect to some of the great schools that Namibia or South Africa have. And so doing that involves quite a significant effort in terms of campus staffing, extracurriculars, the whole sales machine of getting international boarding pupils, all of this in the future. And in the meantime, an essential part of it is that about 20% of the students we want to take from the community, so on full scholarships. And that's where we are now, sort of 75 kids, just about to start being able to take boarders from abroad. And it's also quite a crazy project. It's very time consuming. A whole different category of stress comes when you have 14-year-olds and their angst and misbehavior and hormones and and teachers and parents. Parents are always intriguing to deal with. So it's enormously rewarding also to see children, regardless of their background, because everybody's opportunity poor in Lüderitz. It doesn't matter how much money you have. There's so little to do, there's so little that's organized for young children that whether you have money or not, everybody's opportunity poor. So seeing these children come alive and find new things that they've never done, and open up and become ambitious and curious and learn how to be gallant and helpful for each other is really an enormous reward in itself.
I think it's deeply inspiring. You know, almost the audacity of that vision of creating this world class.
I like that word, audacity. It's a good.
And we're seeing the impact. It's beautiful. And what I also love about you know, what you're doing in terms of the Blue School is the context. You know, it's really to focus also on the marine environment and to bring that into, so it's different. You know, it's not just copy and paste. It's world class, but it's also, you know, real sense of place.
Yeah, I mean, we try to combine what's known and what works well. Just be practical. So we're UK curriculum, Cambridge curriculum, because that's well known, because it's transferable to pretty much any context, not only in this region but also worldwide. Most universities will accept it. And it's tried and tested. And then the whole oceans focus it's physical because we are on the ocean. It's relevant because I'd like to tie our pupils to the sort of jobs that are right in front of them, which are oceans related. But it's also symbolic. The ocean connects all of us, whether you're rich or poor. The water from your tap connects you to anybody else who has a tap via the oceans. But the oceans are also a great symbol for what's often lacking in schooling education, and we teach chemistry. Many children are bored by chemistry because nobody really teaches them why it connects everything to everything else. We teach physics. You know, people are baffled because who cares? What does it matter? And then we say, yeah, no, you could become an astrophysicist. Okay. But if you take something like the ocean, you can start teaching children that chemistry, physics, history, geography, human nature, all these things together are what makes the world turn, what makes a business run, a great play work, human behavior, you know, an ecosystem. You can use this as a symbolic sort of connector between subjects and people, and that's what we're seeking to do.
I'm curious, how are your children doing? How are they, you know, enjoying this crazy adventure?
Largely great. Now and then we worry that the peer group is small. Just the net number of children is small. The diversity of backgrounds is fairly limited. It's a different type of peer group than they would have if we had them if we were living in London and sending them to a school there, or had them at a fancy boarding school somewhere. And there's also good things in that. I don't like the sort of islands of privilege that can create. But it is limited, and then that's offset against which child can have the opportunity to be on an empty beach within 10 minutes, which child can be in the mountains in Aus, abseiling off rocks, or riding with at Kleino's Vista within an hour drive, which children can have such wilderness around them, which children can be at school with people from such diverse backgrounds and yet find that they're all humans enjoying the same sort of humor and the same sort of camaraderie. I think there's also a unique thing that we're offering them that other children don't have. Plus, in itself, they're very cognizant of the fact that they are involved in creating a school. And we don't listen to all their advice, though they come up with some great ideas, some practical, some impractical. But that's also unique, you know, to be involved in actually being able to create the school that you're at. And when we went, we were very conscious about it, and again, not giving them the choice, but made it clear to them that moving to a place like Lüderitz meant a lot less friends, but wilderness and lots of things that other children don't get. And they accepted that, and they still often think of it.
And I love how also, as part of your plans with the Blue School, is to actually, you know, invite foreign students from all over the globe to have some exposure to that and to live that for a few months a year.
Yeah. So we have a full scope of interns who come, and we'll need to get a bit more structured around having the same sort of skills regularly, because at the moment it's, you know, you get a talented violinist, then you get a rower, and then you get which is great. The kids love it, but at some point you need to, if you want to really create good violinists, you have to do it for more than 3 month bursts. But it's great to get all these different people from different countries and backgrounds, show them all the amazing wilderness of Namibia as a whole and Lüderitz specifically. And just like anybody who comes here, the landscape is perhaps the thing that strikes people first, and the wildlife and the things that we start to take for granted. But ultimately, it's the people in Namibia that make it. That give it its real shine. We talked earlier about a sense of community and togetherness and forward-looking and general sort of gallantry and optimism. And Namibia is super strong at that. Namibia has this vibrance and kindness and openness and eccentricity that perhaps comes with being a small country with a small population and a vast space. But that's something that strikes all of our interns and I think ties them emotionally to this country forever. And I think that will pay dividends for them and for the country in the future.
I love that. I think it's so beautifully said. And it's kind of, if I may, it kind of represents your story. We lured you here, with the bait of the dunes and the landscapes. Yeah. But we kept you here with the Namibian people.
Yeah.
And the amazing impact that you and Lucy and everyone else is having. People out there watching this, whether local or international, how can they get involved? Let's talk Blue School first. How can they help, apart from violinists? Well, I'm sure they welcome as well, but...
Yeah, I mean, the school, obviously needs funding until it gets there. It's quite a thing to build. It's word of mouth. It's letting people know about it so that we get indeed quality interns, volunteers, but also pupils and people who want to send their children there, or children who want to go there and have a slightly different, more rugged, braver schooling experience. And
Kelp Blue, how can people follow you? How can they get involved?
So there's the usual sort of website and socials. There's at this stage, we're in sales stage. So again, it's word of mouth, letting people know about this amazing product, about how it's one of the tools for farming to become more, I think, future resilient, and one of the tools to allow agriculture to become more in harmony with nature. And so the more we spread that word, the better for us in terms of sales, but I think the better for the planet as well in terms of improved agriculture.
You're clearly a dreamer, probably an idealist as well. If we sit here 5 or 10 years down the line, what is your ideal reality down in Lüderitz with Kelp Blue?
I'd like to see, if we can throw it a bit broader than Kelp Blue and Lüderitz, I'd really like to see Namibia grab its opportunity of being, of digitizing the relationships between the citizen and the state. I think that sort of idea that was initialized under the previous administration with NIPDB, I really hope that goes ahead, because there's a lot of unnecessary procedure and paperwork that doesn't improve anybody's lives and doesn't really serve much purpose, and that in the digital age can be made much more efficient. And I think that would have enormous, if you look at India, for example, where giving people their digital voter's card has changed a lot of other things, because suddenly banking, transactions, information, relationships with the government have all used that to become more efficient, and unleashed an enormous amount of entrepreneurship and value creation. That's, I think, an example for Namibia. Lüderitz, as a little microcosm of that, I would also like to see it increase its ambition level a lot. So when you look at the sort of ambitions that are talked about in the context of this potential additional flood of money and activity through oil and gas and hydrogen and so forth, to me it feels very conventional to then say, let's become a Dubai, a Singapore, which is both slightly crazy because, of course, it's not going to become a Dubai or a Singapore. But I think actually we can do better than that.
100%.
It's a small town. The ambition to become a big Singapore, I don't think is realistic, nor should it be. I think what we should jump to is thinking of what a perfect town of, perfect not, nothing is ever perfect, but a town of the 22nd century could and should look like. And it's one in which its infrastructure and its relationship with its environment, the natural and the human environment, is much more harmonious and elegant. So waste disposal, these are boring things, but they're the practicality of life. Waste disposal, public transport, roads, all the nuts and bolts of good urban planning I think should launch itself into a slightly more visionary view of how you move away from everything being dependent on cars and internal combustion engine, but think about pedestrian, cyclists, healthier, happier, almost Scandinavian little image of Lüderitz, but then with its Namibian characteristics.
I think it's beautiful, and I think it's so vital. It's a compliment that people say we can be the Singapore of Africa or the Switzerland or Australia of Africa. But I also think we must be very careful. Yes, perfect. Take the blueprints of what's worked out there in the world, like digitalization. It's an obvious thing that's it's 2025. It should have been here, but let's get it done. But then also be very careful, because I think we can be better. We can be better than all that, and in that sense of Namibianness and that sense of community and who we are, and to make it really conducive to just human beings, not all about commercials.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, there's the cultural, there's the sort of sense of community. How do you in the new urban environment make sure that older people who are retired are connected to life? There's a lot more than just the cash and the job creation. It's also what kind of cash are you creating, what kind of jobs, how do people's lives look once they've got the comfort, let's say, of a middle class. Does that mean that they're driving 40 minutes to get to a job where they sit in a cubicle, or can we think of something a little more 21st century?
100%. Daniel, it's an unbelievable story. It really is. It's deeply inspirational.
It's just the beginning.
It's just the beginning, but I love it that the model has been proven, so that sustainability, it is there. On behalf of Gondwana, we are absolutely rooting for you.
Well, look, we didn't talk about it, but once you've got thousands of hectares of kelp forest, you also have all these opportunities of bringing people out to snorkel in it, to do recreational fishing. It's thriving with fish already. Adding this strange man-made wilderness, I think has huge tourist potential and huge commercialization potential in all sorts of other ways.
I cannot wait to bring my boys and to do that. There's a real, and in that process you create a whole ecosystem. So 100%. We hope to be neighbors soon. We're working on a few things, like in Lüderitz and also for the town. And like I said, we're rooting for you, and many opportunities. And I really hope that this will inspire more people out there to start with crazy dreams. And let me remind everybody, it started with tourism. And also for the school and everything. So we root for you. We stay close, and 6,000 hectares. We cannot wait.
Thank you, Faz.
Thank you, Dan.
Look forward to it.